Hello, this is Abigail Barilla with Sparkle and Shine Guidance. I'm in mid-launch for Feminine Leadership's Archetypes and Astrology. It's a 3-month group journey that we go through and we unpack each one of the 13 archetypes through 13 weeks. There's a couple different interesting things that I wanted to share about Sinead O'Connor's birth chart and how once you add in the archetypes of the feminine, how her chart makes so much more sense, and that you can't really see her without adding those in. And she was such an iconic feminine leader to me, and I had to pay homage to her today. Yesterday I couldn't. I would just start crying if I started to do anything. Her album literally saved my life in the early 2000s. So that I definitely had the vision for feminine leadership, the 13 archetypes surrounding me, through listening to that album and doing my own healing work and being where I was within my own, upbringing within the Catholic Church, and all the things that I went through during that process. I remember seeing her rip up the picture of the Pope while I was still in Catholic Church and not knowing what she was doing or why she was doing it. But still, being like, wow, how brave, how there must be something there, and how those little things can spark movement, and sometimes so much more than just saying something, an action of doing something. And you can see that in her chart. So I'm going to get to her chart, and if you have any questions or things that you want to add from looking at her chart that you want to add to the comments, please do. Respectful and mindful of her path and her journey and her children. So let's start here. I'm going to make myself small. Let's do some of the basics. So again, the reason why her chart looks like this is because I've added in the feminine archetypes and all aspects to those feminine archetypes, because to me, that is so important that we honor that and look at that. Okay, so the first thing that we see is that she is an Sagittarius sun. She has her Venus in the first house. She's very Venusian. I mean, if you look at her, she's just such a Venusian, beauty. So she's Sag rising, Sag sun, Sag Venus. And then the other thing that's interesting is she has that moon in Libra, which is Venus ruled. So she's very Venusian. And then she has Vesta, the feminine archetype of burning your own fire bright, the Vestial virgins, that virgin energy. And you can see that through a lot of her early, when she first came out, she did have this very innocent, like Vestial virgin quality to her. The other interesting thing about her is that she died so close to the feast of Mary Magdalene, and that she actually, as a teen, was in the Magdalene laundry gross system that went on for way too long, and so many young women were sent to that. And so she highlighted that. So I think it's really interesting to look at that symbology of shining a light on that system and how corrupt it was. And so that's interesting as well, and how she did that. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is that she was about to come into her Saturn return. And that, I guess I'm skipping around, so maybe I'll just stay with her birth chart and then I'll add in the transits. There's just so much here. Okay, so her birth chart. So she has that sextile energy, that the waning crescent energy to her birth chart, with the moon coming into closure. This lifetime for her was about closing up a lot of loose ends, tying up a lot of loose ends. And we can see that through what a big force she was. And then the music, obviously we want to look at like the music. And one of the key things here is her North Node in Taurus in the 5th house, which is creations, creativity. And then also you see her South Node in the 11th house, which is moving away from. And so it's interesting that she was basically shunned by the largest community that there is, right? Like pop culture. She was she was like banned from NBC and all these things. And that is such the South Node in Scorpio. So she had just come out of that nodal return as well. Okay, I'll talk about transits later. And then music, again, influenced Neptune in the 12th house, conjunct Mercury in Scorpio. So this is where like it's beyond words. The things that she shared, sometimes even just by like, if you watch any of her music videos or her performing, she conveys so much without even using words. She can just convey through sound, through music, through tones. And this is definitely Mercury in the 12th house. Mercury in the 12th house is also very prophetic. So she was like ahead of her time, even though these things have been happening. She just put a voice to it. She just spoke to it, which would be also Sedna. If you see Sedna down, Sedna is the siren energy. I'm going to talk about that when I talk about transits, but she has that in the 4th house, retrograde. So it's like her upbringing. And one of the things that I find most interesting about her and how she was so significant for me in my healing journey is that even though she suffered abuse through her mother, she was able to forgive her mother and see how her mother suffered abuse, and that she wouldn't have been able to or wouldn't do the things that she did if she didn't have that happen, and how it's a systematic oppression through the bigger system at hand. And so I really value that about her. And I think that a lot of that is, if you look at her 3rd house, it's packed Chiron in the 3rd house, which has to do with again, communication, speech, and processing through words, writing, that kind of thing. Saturn in the 3rd in Pisces, Black Moon Lilith, and Pallas Athena. Now, if you look at that, it's kind of creating the seesaw energy with the top of her chart, her midheaven. And the most interesting thing, and in feminine leadership, we go into this, all of these different archetypes, Black Moon Lilith, Pallas Athena, and Medusa at the top of her chart. So Medusa is in her 10th house. It's in her house of public authority. And so she was seen as, people were scared of her. Like, if you really look at the honest truth, the reason they had to condemn her was she was scary. She was speaking truth and she was scary. And if you know the true story of Medusa was blamed. She was victim blamed for being raped. And then she was shunned and sent into the caves and turned into this horrific monster. They created the monster by condemning her and by silencing her. And that was what happened with Sinead. She was speaking truth. She was victim blamed and she was shunned. And it's really fascinating and interesting when you look at her chart to see that at the top of her chart, sandwiched between her midheaven and her Mars in Libra, she had a deep, deep desire to create more balance and justice on the planet. And she knew what the source was. Mercury, Neptune, 12th house. She knew what the source of the issue was. She knew that it wasn't just one perpetrator. She knew that it was a whole system, and she knew what the source of that system was. Colonialism, Catholicism, the system of the church, all of those things. And so she spoke to it, and she spoke truth to it. And because of that, she was shunned. And because of that, many of us, like, I remember so many people talking smack about her when I was like young and not knowing why and just loving her. So that's why there's so many other things that I want to talk about, and I'm running out of time. But let's talk about transits now. Why now? Like, why this happened now? And there could be many reasons, obviously. Ceres, the mother archetype, her own child. And I'm not going to speak to that. There's certain things that just out of respect, I just don't want to speak to, but she has that Ceres, the mother, abundance and loss, like both. How you can have an abundance. She had all these beautiful children, and then she lost one of her children. So that square that Ceres here makes to the midheaven and that seesaw energy is really intense. And then not only that, but the North Node squaring, like the nodes being squared by Pluto, was right on top of Sedna, the siren energy, when she died. And the North Node over Sedna. Sedna is retrograde in her chart in the 4th house. Sedna moves very slow, and Sedna is the siren energy. Sedna has to do with if you think of like the pop culture mermaid, like losing her voice, also how the voice resonates at a certain frequency that is attractive and attracts, um, is like calling in, but then also there's the part of it of losing the voice, and there's the aspect to Sedna, which is about suffering and about an individual suffering and taking that suffering and serving the collective. It's like serve or suffer kind of energy. Child abuse, I mean, why she was such a warrior for that is that she obviously that children don't have a voice, and that they don't have a voice in that. So I think, this Sedna energy is so strong in her chart, and at the time that she passed. So with the North Node creating this, really, it's like if you think of transits as like, if you know acupuncture, the acupuncture needle just like hitting on that point. And so she was being activated in her pain body, Sedna, either how she had been silenced with her own children and the suffering of the world and feeling the weight of that. Sedna in the fourth house is her foundation and where she comes from. And so that you can never escape that energy. You just have to learn to work with it. But because this transit was hitting that so hard, also on the other side of that, you see the South Node conjunct her moon and her Vesta. And I do feel like, I won't go into this too much, but if she had more support, I think it would have passed. I think that there are certain transits that really challenge you, and this was one. And ultimately, right, she didn't make it past that. And I do feel like she fulfilled her dharma with, if you look at her North Node in Taurus. But it is really interesting when you look at these transits to understand that sometimes it literally is just breathing and making it through the day. Because transits past, everything is transitory. And so she had that Pluto squaring the nodes, that Sedna and that moon, and the moon is our emotions and what we're feeling. And so it was a really intense thing to have happen when you look at that. So not only that transit was happening, but there's a lot of other things happening that I'm not going to go into. But I do want to point out the Neptune is slow moving, and Neptune has been, for a while now, because Neptune moves super slow, has been over her third house, and her Chiron, which is super heavy, her Saturn, which is super heavy, Black Moon Lilith. So, and Pallas Athena. Black Moon Lilith is the ride or die in our chart. She is the essence of powerful, woman standing in her own power. And I'll talk about the transit that was also happening with Black Moon Lilith, but Pallas Athena and Black Moon Lilith and Saturn and Chiron. So she was really getting blasted in that third house of, probably there were some things that she couldn't vocalize or couldn't communicate, and the dreamy, and just like Neptune at its highest aspect has to do with connection to spirit realm, has to do with a connection to something higher. But on the shadow aspect of Neptune is delusion, addiction, feeling lost, feeling disconnected, feeling foggy. And of course, the grief that she was in, she was really foggy around that. Okay, and then also, if we look at the, ninth cusp of the 8th to 9th house, she has Black Moon Lilith transiting her, there, along with Mercury and Venus. And sorry, I'm kind of glitching out here a little bit, but that transit is highlighting all these other things. So like the Sedna point, her sun, her Venus, her eros, her passion, it is activating all this fire. And what we know about fire is there's transmutation. And so even though, like, without judgment, without looking at anything and without knowing anything, there was something pulling her to something else. Like it is like transmutation, the Phoenix rising energy, with Venus retrograde happening and Black Moon Lilith there, creating that pull towards that. So it's a very interesting chart natally. And it's also very interesting to look at the transits. And so I thought it might be helpful for you to understand, like with your own chart or with other people's charts, that There can be things getting kicked up. There is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad, but there is challenges. And when we're in one of those challenging times with the transits, we do need support. We do need community. And it's really important to understand that everything is transitory. Anything that is hitting that is feeling really difficult and heavy will at some point turn light again. And it's up to us to have the tools and to reach out when we do need that support. And astrology for me has always been that tool to utilize to understand deeper kind of what we're being called into, what's actually being ignited. And sometimes it is just finding therapeutic ways to deal with that. And sometimes it is taking an action or making a change in our lives. So when we're looking at all of these feminine archetypes, if we didn't have the feminine archetypes in this chart for her, there would be so many pieces of the puzzle that would be missing. And I just want to express that this is my why of like why feminine leadership is so important, why the archetypes in astrology and adding them into the chart is so important. And when you do that within your own chart, how much more comes alive and how much more story and how much more depth and how much more clarity can come online. And this can be deeply healing and transformative in your life. And how when you have these tools and you have this ability to go deeper and transform and transmute and alchemize these energies, your gifts come alive, your talents come alive, resources come back in, the ability to connect to others come back in, and the ways that you're going to do that become clear. And so this is my why of feminine leadership. If you feel called to understand deeper some of these archetypes that not everybody gets to understand in their life, not everybody gets to access these in their lifetime, but you have the opportunity to do that, I'm calling you in and I'm asking you to check out Feminine Leadership. It's a 3-month journey with me. We dive deep. Each week we unpack a deeper level of this and why I'm connecting this to this paying homage to Sinead O'Connor is that, you know, she was so foundational for me in the first spark of this program. And so I really wanted to communicate that and share that, and that it's not by chance that we're going into the autumn of a 3-month journey of feminine leadership, and that it is open for enrollment, and that I want to invite you in. There's early registration until August 16th. I'll